Welcome to the Business Spotlight series. My name is Kay Cote, and I'm your host on today's episode. And today I have Darren Nix, CEO of Steadily, as my guest. We're going to be learning about his business, his journey to business ownership, best practices that he's learned along the way, and cover some challenges that he's faced to give you that inside look to what it's like to own and operate a business. If this is your first time on our channel, be sure to like and subscribe to get notified when we drop episodes like this. Welcome, Darren. Thanks for being on the show. It's great to meet you.
Likewise, I'm very glad to be here.
Wonderful. But before we dive into all things business, I'd love to learn a little bit about you. Feel free to share a bit about yourself.
Well, I run a company called Steadily Insurance Company. We insure rental properties across the country. We're about 200 people now, 5 years old. And all of this grew out of personal experience. So I was a very small scale rental property investor around 2017. And every time I needed to insure one of my rental properties, I found that I was paying 4 to 5 times what I would have paid if I were a homeowner in that property, which struck me as really, really odd. And so I started digging deeper into the space, and I had a background in insurance, and one thing led to another over the course of 2 years, and I ended up starting an insurance carrier 5 years ago.
Wow, that's incredible. Were you, no, you said you were doing business before that, or you were on business, doing business yourself, or were you with a company at that time before you started?
I was a startup guy for the last 19 years. So I'm a software engineer by training and started my first company when I was 26. And
Okay.
over the course of the last 19 years, have had four different startups. One of them crashed and burned kind of catastrophically very quickly. And the other three grew to varying levels of success. The last one was pretty successful. And we sold that company to Indeed in 2017. And that's
Mhm.
how we ended up moving the whole company to Austin because Indeed.com is based here. And so we uprooted everybody from San Francisco, and we're one of the pre-COVID tech people driving up real estate prices in Austin by moving from San Francisco.
Oh, well, welcome to Austin. I'm glad to have you here. So let's dive in a little deeper. So you mentioned you have 200 people currently employed. Now, are they all local to Austin or are they kind of spread out?
We're very in person, but we have two offices. So we have about a third of our folks here in Austin, which is primarily product and engineering. And then we have the other two-thirds in Kansas City, which is much more ops focused.
Okay, I'm just taking a quick note here. Kansas City. Nice. And what is your, I like to share about the company culture. What's your company culture like on your team, and how does that drive your business forward?
We, because this is our fourth company, we had the benefit of hindsight to say, what are mistakes that we made in prior companies that we don't want to make again? And what are things we wish we had the foresight to do? And so we ended up writing about a 70-page long culture deck that had one rule on the first page, which was if at any point this culture deck becomes aspirational as opposed to descriptive of what we're actually doing, we have to rewrite the culture deck so that it describes who we actually are, not who we wish we were.
Mm.
Because so many cultural statements that we read over the years, you read them, but then you join the company and you find that the reality on the inside doesn't really match the culture deck. And we said, okay, if we're going to write this thing, it needs to be um, our litmus test for if we're doing the right thing. And so some of the things that we practice and preach are um, context, not control, was one of the very early ones. So this was the idea that you hire extremely high performing people who are often very expensive, and you give them all of the context on where the business is going and what we're trying to do and the why behind asks, and then give them the latitude to go and charge in that direction without a huge amount of control. Pay
Mm.
top of market was one of the others. So our litmus test for hiring is pay more than most other people would reasonably pay for a role. And so
Mhm.
we periodically conduct market surveys for all of our roles. And if we're not the second to highest payer for that role out there in the market, then we raise wages. So there are lots of things like that that we do that I don't proselytize them to other founders to say you should go and do this, but they work for us because of the unique combinations of where we're at in the market and how we're growing.
Mhm.
And we take those cultural practices super seriously because at this point in time for this company, they work.
Mhm. Hmm. You said a lot of golden nuggets just in that description. It makes a lot of sense because you're staying true and authentic to what your company is rather than, like you said, what you're maybe if it like veers off course or what it looks like it wants to be. So I think that's a very honest and authentic way to create and sustain a company culture for sure. Now, within your company, do you currently see like any emerging leaders that are growing and what is that experience like if you are?
I think everybody that joins a company to a certain extent would say that they get hit with a fire hose when they join. I know that that's very true of Steadily. I think everybody says that without exception when they join, because one of the expectations that we have is that because we're recruiting folks who are typically the one of the most expensive people in their field, the expectations are comparably high. So we're expecting that the average person that we hire in at Steadily is going to be able to produce the quality and the output of 2 to 3 median performers. And
Mhm.
so when folks join, even though we invest a lot of energy during the recruitment process to explain how high our expectations are, they're often surprised when they join of just how high the expectations are. And so it's intense. We don't have any qualms about describing our environment as being intense. And the result of that is that the advancement opportunities for folks that join are very rapid for folks that thrive in that environment. And so we've seen many people that joined at a fairly entry level and their career accelerated. And that is just one of the reasons why people are typically excited to join startups because they're taking on a lot of risk existentially when you join a startup because there's no way to have the confidence that in 5 years this company is going to have the same level of stability of, let's say, a State Farm or an Allstate, which have literally been around for 100 years. Like everybody that joins those companies knows that they're going to still be around in 5 years. When you join a 1 or 2 year old startup, statistically, the odds that that company is still going to be around in 2 years is less than 65%. Like the fail
Mhm.
rate is high. But in exchange for taking on that risk, what they're getting is a massive amount of career advancement in a short period of time that they probably would have not have gotten in a much bigger company. And
Mhm.
so to answer your question, yes, there's a sizable cohort of folks that have already advanced. There's a lot more that are in the early innings of that, and it's in the cards for pretty much everybody here, given how fast the company is growing.
Wow, that's incredible and awesome to hear too that you see that growth and see people really who do latch onto it really accelerate quickly. Looking at let's kind of shift gears to your ideal client and what that looks like for you. I know you mentioned the insurance. If I were to say I walked in your doors or checked you out online, how would I know I would be a great client for you?
We serve people that own 1 to 20 single family rentals. So it's people like you and then people like me who were not large institutional investors. We're not doing this professionally where we manage 200 or 500 properties, but we have one or more rental properties that we're managing on the side. In the industry, they would be called an incidental landlord. Folks like us have a difficult time getting high quality, affordable insurance for our rental properties. That's just a fact of the market and Steadily exists to serve those people. So everybody that fits that description is an ideal customer for us, and that's one of the reasons why we've grown from, we did 200,000 in sales the first year, and now we're doing 250 million a year in sales. So it's just exploded because we came to market and filled a gap that was wide open.
Wow, that is incredible. And I feel like especially around this area, you can probably find quite a few clients with the Austin growing. And now, do you work with folks outside of Austin as well, or are you more centralized to Austin?
We operate in all 50 states. We do very little in Florida. Florida is a kind of a strange real estate market,
Hmm.
but from an insurance perspective. But outside of Florida, we insure 100,000 properties across the country.
Wow, that's incredible. And now kind of looking at, I love to share a little bit about the beginning years, the first couple of years in business and a challenge that you maybe were faced with when you started. What is something that you faced in those first few years, and how did you overcome it?
The biggest challenge that we had trying to start an insurance carrier is that if you think about what it means to insure a property, you will, let's say, a $250,000 house in uh, the suburbs of Austin where real estate's a little bit cheaper.
Mhm.
Um, on that policy, somebody might be paying $1,200 a year. So the insurance company is collecting $1,200 and they're signing up for a liability of $250,000. And so if you repeat that 4 times, now you're at 1 million in liability, but you've only collected 4,000 something dollars in premium.
Mhm.
And then if you do that 1,000 times, now you've insured 4,000 properties and you potentially have $1 billion of losses. If all 4,000 of them got wiped out by a tornado or a fire, 1 billion in losses. For an insurance company that might only have 2 people, right? Like tiny, you only have 4,000 policies. And so the quantum of how big the dollar numbers get in insurance in like a downside scenario are just so big
Yeah.
that any insurance company has to go to what's called the reinsurance market. And they say, hi, we would like to insure all these properties. But if a tornado came in and wiped out half of our portfolio, we would not be able to pay all these claims. But somehow those claims have to get paid one way or
Mhm.
another. So we need to trade you some of the risk, and we need you as a reinsurer to guarantee these policies, these claims, so that in the event that a super catastrophic scenario happens, like the California wildfire, there's someone other than us, like backstopping us to pay all these claims. And so reinsurance, the dollar numbers are just massive. You're talking about trillions of dollars of liability that have to move around. And so of course these reinsurance companies are huge, billions and billions of dollars in assets. And so then here you come as this 3-month-old startup with 2 or 3 people knocking on the door of some of the oldest and biggest companies in the world and saying, hi, we would like you to guarantee 4,000 properties, which is like 1 billion in potential losses. And trying to get them to take you seriously it's this chicken and the egg dilemma because you're early and you're small, and therefore you don't have the credibility to be able to attract interest. But on the other hand, without the reinsurance, you can never get off the ground. And so the reality was that for a very long period of time, the only way a new insurance company got created was if an existing team from insurance company A like airlifted out and started a new company, because then they came with all the relationships, they came with all the credibility. And so it was fairly easy for them to get reinsurance. But as a startup, when you have none of that, it's almost impossible. And so that was the single biggest struggle that we had starting the company. And the way that we solved it was by stacking the deck with incredibly veteran hires who had done this before. And we just assembled a dream team so that when we went knocking on the door of these large reinsurers, they said, okay, you are new, you are a startup, we haven't met you before, but the reputation of the folks on your team gives us confidence that you guys know what you're doing.
That is such a golden nugget because teamwork truly does make the dream work when especially when building something of this nature in any industry, but really that sounds like it was a huge win. And now looking forward at like the next 3 to 5 years, where do you see the company going in the next 3 to 5 years?
It's our aspiration to take the company public. So in insurance, the threshold for going public is somewhere in the 600 to a billion a year in sales. So we're probably 2 to 3 years out from getting to that size of scale. But that's been our goal from 2020 to today. And we believe that it's in the cards for us by 2028.
Well, I'm excited to follow that journey and see you make those goals happen. As you're growing, as you're seeing this, what is a current challenge that you're facing as you're expanding?
This is getting into the weeds of insurance, but good data.
Mm,
So one of the things that is strange about insurance is that there's a pretty strong incentive for folks who are applying for coverage to omit information or misrepresent. And it's especially a problem in landlord insurance because this happened to me when I went to insure one of my properties. It was a property that I bought in Chicago through a broker, and I'd hired good inspectors and I had confidence that it was good property because I used to live in Chicago in this neighborhood, but I had never seen the property myself.
mhm.
And so the insurance agent I was working with was asking me questions like, "Oh, when was the heater last replaced? When was your AC last replaced?" And I'm like, I don't know. Let's go and check the Zillow listing and see if anybody like happened to mention something like this, and it didn't. So then we just kind of guessed at when we thought it had last been replaced. And so even on the homeowner side, when you're living in a property, there are things you may not know about the house, like when the electrical was last replaced. Like who
Mm,
knows? But to an insurance agent, these things matter. And so if you imagine this like game of telephone uh resulting in eventually in like a price on the risk, the price is quite wrong in many cases for a lot of people. And what that results in is that folks that are low risk are paying more than they should, and folks that are high risk are paying less than they should. And that's bad. And so it's one of the biggest challenges that we deal with is trying to get better data so that we can price risk correctly so that people pay the fair price as opposed to, you know, good folks subsidizing the bad folks.
that does sound like a challenge. I know I think about when I had my previous home and I didn't really know much about my home outside of,
Yeah,
the square footage and things like that. So that makes total sense. Well, this has been such a fun deep dive into your business, like learning about you, about the company you're building and continuing to build. So I'd love to dive into our rapid fire Q&A where I ask you 4 questions and you answer very top of mind.
sure.
All right, question number 1 is what is a key to success for you?
Calculated risk, which probably doesn't surprise as an insurance company that I would include risk in the definition. But um, the safest path is often not the right path. Instead, it's calculating, okay, what's the probability that this thing is going to go well versus badly? And what's the cost in the good scenario and the bad scenario? And then taking the one that has the calculated best payoff. So in poker, that would be expected value. That's the way I try to think about everything to varying degrees of success.
Mhm. I resonate with that big time. Number 2 is what is some advice you have for other business owners?
Controversial, but find a way to build in person. Um, we we had this period of time where we had folks that were in the same roles. Some were in office and some were remote because remember we started during COVID. And what we saw was that when we hired a person that was already a veteran in a role, there was almost no difference in performance between the in-office versus the remote folks because they already knew how to do the job and they were coming in to do a job that they already knew how to do well. And there wasn't an expectation of change. But for the folks that we brought in that were earlier career that needed to skill up and develop, or for the folks that were in charge of building,
Mhm.
we saw a tremendous disparity between the folks that were remote versus the folks that were in office. And it was like the folks who were in office were just, the wind was just at their back. Everything happened faster. They grew more quickly. They built deeper relationships. And I think that depending on the stage that the business is in and their product, there are substantial dividends to building together in person that I think folks um, are undercounting, even though I am the first to admit recruiting in person is hard and it's expensive. But I think that the payoff for many companies is enormous.
Wow, that is some solid advice. Thank you for sharing that. And the third question is, what is it could be a book, a podcast, an article you've read, like something that's resonated with you recently?
Jonathan Haidt wrote a book called The Righteous Mind: Why Reasonable People Disagree About Politics and Religion. Very topical today. He wrote it a number of years ago, but it resonates. And it's just a fascinating look at um, why people disagree. And so I've taken some of the ideas from the book and experiments and got up to people that I knew were on kind of leaned in a different way than I do politically, and had those conversations with them, and it was incredibly eye-opening and led me to be able to understand their worldview much better than I did before.
Ooh, I wrote that one down. That sounds like a book I'd love to read. So thank you for sharing that. The final question is, if you could wave a magic wand and rapidly improve one aspect of your business, what would it be?
It would be again, super deep in the weeds of insurance, um, but it would be the rate at which we have to say no to customers.
Mm,
So it's my goal to be able to have a product that is that can take all comers, so to speak. So if somebody comes to me with a worn out mobile home, a log cabin, like all of these, the whole spectrum of properties that you see out there, I want to have a product that's affordably priced for everybody. Whereas today there are these categories of properties that we just have to say no to. We don't have a product for them, and that hurts. So it's something that I'm sprinting to solve, and that would be my magic wand.
mm. Well, that's powerful. Again, thank you for this conversation. It was great to learn about you and what you're building. Before we get to our final question today, how can people connect with you and your business online?
They can get coverage in a couple of minutes at steadily.com. And we're also very active on LinkedIn and Instagram and everywhere else. So we'd love to hear your feedback.
Thank you. And for our final question today, what is most inspiring to you today?
I'm inspired by, well, it's a little bit of a story. So I was flying out to New York to meet with a potential investor that's pretty well known in tech circles. And I was sitting in the lobby, and it's a big company, so they were having folks coming in and out to also trying to raise money, and it was a just a parade of people that I'm guessing on average were like not even out of college, 19, 20, 21, maybe a few 24, 25-year-olds sprinkled in there. And the level of the belief and the energy that folks can go out and build something awesome on their own today with the tools that are available. We're living in a special time that, and we have been for the last 15 to 20 years, that two to three people with an idea can go and build something and make something happen, even if it's not in tech. Like there's a respect and an admiration and an engine built around helping people be entrepreneurs today that did not exist 50, 100, 200 years ago. So it's a joy to see. I find that really cool, and I feel fortunate to be able to be a part of that.
That is very inspiring. Darren, thank you again. This conversation has been so much fun, and I wish you the best with everything you build.
Thank you very much. It was great talking to you, Kay.